The Vorthic Armada cut through space like a disease, leaving nothing but scorched worlds and silence in its wake. Admiral Kexthara stood on the bridge of the Sovereign's Wrath, watching the tactical display paint another conquered system in crimson. 17 human colonies had fallen in as many days. The bipedal mammals had proven more resilient than expected, but resilience meant nothing against overwhelming force. "Admiral," came the guttural voice of Commander Veldan, his secondary, arms manipulating the holo-controls with practiced precision. "Our forward scouts report the human fleet has retreated to the Hadron Nebula. They've gone dark, no communications, no energy signatures." Kexthara's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. The Hadron Nebula, roiling mass of ionized gas and electromagnetic storms that stretched across 12 light-years, perfect for hiding, terrible for fighting. The humans were desperate. How many ships? Intelligence estimates 300 vessels, including their heavy dreadnoughts, perhaps half their remaining fleet's strength. The admirals' eyes focused on the nebula's swirling colors on the main screen. Humanity had lasted longer than the Zephyrians, or the Corvin Collective, but every species eventually broke when faced with the Vorthic's numerical superiority. 2,000 ships against 300, the mathematics were clear. They think the Nebula will protect them, Kexthara mused, her voice carrying the authority of a being who had conquered 47 worlds. "The electromagnetic interference will blind their sensors as much as ours, but we have numbers." Veldan's elongated skull tilted. "The nebula's density makes long-range detection impossible. We could face ambushes, Admiral. The humans have shown creativity in their desperation, creativity." Kexthara had seen it firsthand at the Battle of Kepler 442, where human engineers had turned their own mining stations into kinetic projectiles, ramming them into Vorthic capital ships with devastating effect. At Proxima Centauri, they detonated their own fusion reactors to create artificial stellar flares, cooking an entire battle group in radiation. Desperate mammals doing desperate things. But desperation had limits, and the Vorthic had pushed humanity past all of them. The species that had once sent diplomatic envoys now fought with the ferocity of cornered animals. They lost Earth 6 months ago, their homeworld reduced to a glowing cinder, yet somehow continued to resist. "Signal the fleet," Kexthara commanded. "We enter the nebula in formation Beta 7. Hunter-killer groups will sweep the outer reaches, while the main battle line advances through the center. The humans cannot hide forever." As the Vorthic Armada adjusted course, sliding toward the nebula's writhing boundary like a steel tide, none of them noticed the subtle fluctuations in the cosmic background radiation. The patterns were too faint for their sensors, too carefully modulated to register as artificial. Deep within the nebula, Captain Marcus Hendricks floated in the zero-gravity command center of his ship. The Reaper's edge, around him, holographic. Displays showed the positions of his fleet, not 300 ships as Vorthic intelligence believed, but 732. The discrepancy wasn't accidental. "Ghost fleet signals are green across the board," reported Lieutenant Commander Rivera, her voice tight with controlled tension. "All ships report ready status." Hendricks nodded, his scarred face illuminated by the tactical display. The Ghost Fleet, humanity's final gambit, built in the hidden shipyards of the Oort cloud while Earth burned. Ships designed not for glory or exploration, but for one purpose, killing Vorthic. "How long until they reach the outer perimeter?" 14 hours, sir. 14 hours until the Vorthic discovered that humanity's retreat into the nebula wasn't desperation, it was an invitation. The aliens had spent months hunting scattered human survivors across the galaxy, never realizing they were being herded toward this moment. Hendricks closed his eyes and thought of Earth, of the 8 billion souls whose ashes now drifted in solar wind. The Vorthic expected to find frightened refugees hiding in the nebula's embrace. Instead, they would find humanity's nightmare made manifest. The Vorthic destroyer Bloodhound was the first to die. Commander Zekemer had volunteered his ship for the advanced reconnaissance, eager to claim the honor of first contact with the human remnants. His 400-meter vessel slipped through the nebula's outer edge, like a predator entering tall grass, sensors straining against the electromagnetic static. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, his sensor operator announced. "Single vessel, human configuration, appears to be a frigate class." Zekemer's mandibles spread in satisfaction. The human ship hung motionless against the nebula's purple backdrop, its hull scarred and patched, clearly a survivor from one of the earlier battles. "Easy prey, power weapons, Target their engines first. I want prisoners for interrogation. The Bloodhound's plasma cannon swiveled toward the human vessel, charging with lethal energy. But as Zekimer prepared to give the firing order, something nagged at his tactical mind. The human ship's position seemed deliberate, exposed. That's when the trap closed. The human frigate that had seemed helpless suddenly blazed with reactor signatures as its stealth systems disengaged. But it wasn't alone. 6 more ships materialized from the Nebula's concealing embrace, surrounding the Bloodhound in a perfect kill sphere. Impossible, Zekimer breathed. Our sensors showed nothing. His words died as the human ships opened. Fire in perfect synchronization, not the crude kinetic rounds or energy beams the Vorthik expected, but something new, streams of weaponized plasma that carved through space like liquid lightning. The rounds punched through the Bloodhound's shields as if they didn't exist, tearing into the hull with surgical precision. Zekimer watched in horror as his engine room vanished in a cascade of explosions. The ship's fusion plant going critical. Emergency alarms shrieked as atmosphere vented through a dozen hull breaches. His crew scrambled for escape pods, but the humans weren't finished. The lead human ship, designated Salem's Lot according to the tactical display, adjusted its aim with mechanical precision. A single plasma stream lanced out, striking the Bloodhounds. Command section. Zekimer had just enough time to register the impossible accuracy before the bridge erupted around him, 3 light minutes away, aboard the Reaper's edge. Captain Hendricks watched the destroyer's death through a dozen sensor feeds. The engagement had lasted 4 to 7 seconds. First blood to us, Rivera reported, her voice carefully neutral. Pack Leader 7 reports the target is neutralized. No survivors detected. Hendricks nodded grimly. The Salem's Lot and her Wolf Pack had performed flawlessly, using the Nebula's interference to mask their approach until the killing moment. But this was just the beginning. Signal Admiral Kexthara on all frequencies. He ordered, let's see if we can't make this personal. The transmission cut through the Nebula's static like a blade, reaching the Vorthik flagship minutes later. Kexthara stood rigid as the human captain's image appeared on her screen, a scarred face with cold, intelligent eyes that seemed to look directly through her. Admiral Kexthara, Hendricks began, his voice carrying the weight of countless dead worlds. I am Captain Marcus Hendricks, commanding the Earth Defense Force Ghost Fleet. You destroyed my homeworld. You murdered my species, and now you've made the mistake of following us into our chosen battlefield. The transmission flickered as the Nebula's interference grew stronger. Your commander Zekimer died 30 seconds ago, along with his entire crew. Consider it a down payment on the debt you owe humanity. We'll be collecting the rest with interest. The screen went dead, leaving Kexthara staring at empty static around her. The bridge crew waited for orders, their alien faces betraying nothing, but she could sense their unease. The humans had lured them into the Nebula deliberately, and they'd just announced their intention to make it a killing ground. All ships to battle stations, she commanded, her voice sharp with authority. Deploy screen formations and advance. Launch all fighter wings for close patrol, and send word to the High Command we may need reinforcements. As the massive Vorthik fleet began its transformation from pursuit formation to battle array, Hendricks allowed himself a thin smile. The aliens were reacting exactly as predicted, clustering their ships for mutual support. It would make them harder to isolate, but it would also concentrate the target's dot in the Nebula's depths. 700 ghost ships waited in perfect silence, their crews counting down the hours until the real killing began. The second wave hit 6 hours later, and this time the Vorthik were ready. Admiral Kexthara had deployed her fleet in a defensive hedgehog formation, with overlapping fields of fire and layered sensor nets, designed to penetrate the Nebula's interference. When the human attack came, it arrived as a cascade of violence that tested every tactical doctrine in the Vorthik military manual. Multiple contacts, all vectors, screened the sensor operator aboard the flagship Sovereign's Wrath. Estimate 40 vessels, closing fast. The humans came in like wolves, breaking from the Nebula's concealment in perfectly coordinated packs. Their ships moved with inhuman precision, each vessel following flight paths that maximized damage while minimizing exposure. The lead element struck the Vorthik screening force with devastating effect. Captain Nexival, commanding the cruiser Doomstar, found himself facing 3 human destroyers that flickered in and out of sensor contact like ghosts. Their weapons, those impossible plasma streams carved through his ship's armor like heated knives through flesh. Return fire, all batteries, Nexival roared, but his gunners were shooting as shadows. The humans used the nebula itself as camouflage, ducking behind gas clouds and electromagnetic storms that rendered targeting impossible. A plasma bolt punched through the Doomstar's hull, vending atmosphere and crew into the void. Another struck the forward weapon array, silencing half the ship's guns in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Nexivil realized with growing horror that his ship was being systematically dismantled. Engines at 30% were losing power to all forward sections. The human ships pressed their advantage without mercy. The UES Banshee swept in from the port side, her plasma cannons speaking with mechanical precision. Each shot found its mark: reactor cooling lines, weapon mounts, sensor rays, until the Doomstar was reduced to a crippled hulk spinning helplessly through space. Across the battle zone, similar scenes played out as human wolf packs savaged the Vorthic screening force. The aliens' numerical superiority meant nothing when they couldn't see their enemies. Until it was too late. Aboard the Reaper's Edge, Hendricks monitored the engagement through tactical feeds from 100 different ships. His fleet was performing exactly as designed, each vessel a precision instrument of destruction, wielded by crews who had nothing left to lose. Pack Leader 12 reports the cruiser Vengeance is neutralized, Rivera announced. That's 7 confirmed kills in the first engagement phase. Casualties? Light. We lost the destroyer Phantom to a lucky shot, but her crew evacuated successfully. Hendricks nodded, filing away the information. Every ship lost was irreplaceable, but the exchange ratio was heavily in humanity's favor. The Vorthic were learning that their usual tactics, overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority, meant nothing in this swirling maze of gas and lightning. On the Vorthic flagship, Admiral Kexthara studied the tactical display with growing unease. Her fleet had already lost 23 ships to an enemy that seemed to materialize from nowhere, strike with surgical precision, then vanish back into the nebula's embrace. Standard pursuit was impossible. Her heavy dreadnoughts were too slow to catch the human ships, and her faster vessels died when they tried to give chase. Admiral Commander Velden approached with visible reluctance. The screening force requests permission to withdraw to the main battle line. They're being slaughtered piecemeal. Kexthara, as for eyes focused on the carnage displayed before her. The humans were fighting like nothing she'd encountered before, not with the desperate fury of a dying species, but with cold, calculated malice. Every attack was planned, every movement precise. They weren't just trying to survive, they were trying to kill as many Vorthic as possible. Negative. Signal all ships to contract formation and advance as a single unit. If the humans want to play games in this cosmic fog, we'll force them into open battle. It was exactly what Hendricks had been waiting for. As the massive Vorthic fleet compressed into a tight formation and began pushing deeper into the nebula, they were unknowingly walking into the killing field humanity had spent months preparing. Hidden weapon platforms awakened throughout the gas clouds, their sensors painting targeting solutions on the approaching armada. Phase 2 initiates in 30 minutes. Hendricks announced to his fleet, all ghost ships to assign positions. Remember, we're not here to win a fair fight. We're here to make them pay for Earth. The nebula pulsed with hidden energy as 700 human ships moved to their final positions, ready to show the Vorthic what desperation looked like when it was armed with human ingenuity and bottomless rage. The minefield triggered at exactly 13:47 hours. Ship time. Admiral Kexthara watched in stunned silence as her tightly packed formation sailed directly into humanity's most vicious surprise. The mines weren't crude explosive devices, but sophisticated weapons that had been seeded throughout the nebula over months of preparation. Each one was a miniature fusion reactor wrapped in stealth composites, invisible until the moment of detonation. The first explosions rippled through the Vorthic vanguard like a chain reaction of stellar fire. The heavy cruiser Death's Herald simply vanished in a sphere of nuclear light, its 1,200 crew vaporized instantly. The battleship Iron Fist lost its entire forward section, atmosphere streaming from jagged hull breaches as secondary explosions tore through its superstructure. Evasive maneuvers, all ships scatter. Kexthara commanded, but it was too late. The formation was too tight. The ships too massive to change course quickly. They sailed through the minefield like ancient ships of the line, absorbing catastrophic damage with each passing second. Commander Veldan's station exploded in a shower of sparks as a mine detonated close to the flagship's hull. The Sovereign's Ras shuddered like a living thing in pain, her massive bulk rolling as shock waves propagated through the superstructure. Damage report. Hull breaches on deck 7 through 12. We've lost primary sensors and the port weapon ray, but the mines were only the beginning. As the Vorthic fleet reeled from the nuclear bombardment, the real trap revealed itself. The nebulous gas clouds suddenly blazed with the light of igniting fusion drives. As the Ghost fleet emerged from concealment, they came from all directions simultaneously above, below, and from every compass point 700 ships materializing. From the cosmic fog like the wrath of dead gods. Each vessel was a masterpiece of human engineering, built not for exploration or commerce, but for the single purpose of killing aliens. Captain Hendricks stood in the zero-gravity command center of the Reaper's Edge, watching his fleet execute the most complex naval maneuver in human history. Every ship knew its role. Every captain understood the stakes. This wasn't just a battle, it was humanity's funeral pyre, and they intended to take as many Vorthic with them as possible. All ships, weapons free. He broadcast across the tactical net, show them what Earth's children can do. The Ghost fleet struck with coordinated fury that transcended military doctrine and entered the realm of art. Human destroyers darted between Vorthic capital ships like angry wasps, their plasma cannons speaking in deadly concert. The UES Reaper rolled inverted and punched through the formation center, her weapons blazing as she severed the battleship Conqueror's spine with surgical precision. Above the main engagement, the heavy cruiser used Lazarus squared off against the Vorthic dreadnoughts. In a knife fight that lit up the Nebula with weapons fire, Captain Torres drove her ship directly between the alien vessels, accepting hits from both enemies while pouring devastating fire into their flanks. Her ship's armor buckled and burned, but she held course until both dreadnoughts were crippled. HULKS. The Lazarus died 3 minutes later when a Vorthic plasma torpedo punched through her reactor compartment, but Torres had taken 800 alien lives with her across the battle zone. Similar acts of calculated sacrifice played out as human crews traded their lives for maximum enemy casualties. The destroyer UES Phantom ran the Vorthic flagship's escort, her captain triggering the fusion plant just as the ships made contact. The explosion took out both vessels and cleared the path for an attack run. On Kexthara's command ship, the Admiral found herself fighting for her life as human assault. Shuttles breached her flagship's hull. The boarding parties came armed with weapons that violated every civilized convention of war. Plasma grenades that turned Vorthic flesh to vapor, sonic weapons that liquefied internal organs, and worst of all, the humans themselves. They fought like demons, accepting wounds that would incapacitate any rational being while continuing to kill with methodical efficiency. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim led her assault team through the flagship's corridors, her face a mask of controlled fury as she carved through alien defenders with a plasma blade that burned at stellar temperatures. Bridge section secured, she reported over the comm, moving to engineering. But the humans weren't trying to capture the ship, they were trying to destroy it from within. Each boarding party carried fusion charges designed to cripple the vessel's vital systems. Within minutes, the Sovereign's wrath was bleeding atmosphere and power as human saboteurs systematically destroyed everything that kept the massive ship operational. Kexthara watched her fleet die around her through the fractured remains of her command displays. In 30 minutes of combat, she had lost over 400 ships to an enemy that seemed to care nothing for their own survival. The humans fought like they were already dead, trading lives with mathematical precision to maximize alien casualties. For the first time in her military career, Admiral Kexthara tasted something she had never experienced before: fear. The Nebula had become a graveyard painted in fire and blood. What had begun as a tactical engagement had devolved into the most savage close-quarters battle in galactic history. Ships grappled at point-blank range while boarding parties fought corridor-to-corridor battles inside their hulls. The electromagnetic interference that had initially hidden the human fleet now trapped both sides in a maelstrom of violence where survival depended on reflexes and raw determination. Captain Hendricks felt the Reaper's Edge shudder as another Vorthic torpedo found its mark. His flagship was dying around him, atmosphere venting from a dozen hull breaches while fires raged through the lower decks. But she was still fighting, her plasma cannon spitting defiance at the 3 Vorthic destroyers that circled her like sharks. "Sir, we've lost main power to the forward batteries," Lieutenant Commander Rivera reported, blood streaming from a head wound. "Engineering reports the reactor containment is failing." Hendricks absorbed the information without emotion. His ship was finished, but the battle was far from over. Through the tactical display, he could see his fleet locked in mortal combat with the Vorthic Armada. Human ships burned and died, but they took alien vessels with them in a cascade of mutual annihilation. The destroyer UES Vendetta had wrapped herself around a Vorthic battleship like a parasite, her crew fighting through the alien vessel's corridors. While both ships' reactors counted down to overload, Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the comm. "Tell my wife I remembered Earth." The explosion lit up the Nebula like a newborn star, taking both ships and their crews into nuclear oblivion. 3 sectors away, the heavy cruiser UES Defiance found herself surrounded by 6 Vorthic vessels. Her captain, Commander Elena Vasquez, made the only decision that honor allowed. She ordered all hands to battle stations and drove her ship directly into the enemy formations. Hard. All weapons, continuous fire, make every shot count. The Defiance became a blazing comet of destruction, her guns speaking in constant thunder as she carved through the Vorthic formation. Enemy fire hammered her hull until the armor glowed cherry red, but Vasquez held course. Her forward plasma cannon punched through the battleship Dominator's reactor housing, gutting the massive vessel from stem to stern. A Vorthic torpedo took off the Defiance's port side, spinning her like a broken toy, but her starboard batteries continued firing until the very end. When the ship finally died, she had taken 4 alien vessels with her. The battle's savagery affected both sides. Vorthic boarding parties, traditionally disciplined and methodical, found themselves fighting for survival against human crews who seemed immune to pain and fear. In the corridors of the cruiser Knight's Edge, Vorthic Marines discovered what desperation could do to a supposedly civilized species. The human defenders had booby-trapped every compartment, turning their own ship into a deadly maze. Plasma charges detonated when doors were opened. Gravity generators created crushing fields that liquefied bone, and atmospheric processors pumped toxins through the ventilation systems. Commander Zexcala led his assault team through the ship's medical bay, only to discover that the human crew had turned their own injured into living weapons. Wounded humans, to damage the fight normally, had wired themselves with explosive charges and waited in the shadows for alien boarders to approach. The resulting explosions claimed 30 Vorthic Marines and left the survivors traumatized by an enemy that weaponized their own mortality, but the aliens gave as good as they got. The Vorthic had survived as a species by being more vicious than their enemies, and they brought that savagery to bear against humanity's ghost fleet. The battleship Apex Predator cornered the human destroyer Salem's Lot and proceeded to dissect her with methodical precision. Captain Rodriguez watched his crew die around him as Vorthic plasma beams carved through his ship's hull like surgical instruments. His weapons officer screamed as her console exploded, filling the bridge with toxic smoke. His navigator simply vanished when a direct hit vaporized the entire forward section. "Sir, we're dead in space," the chief engineer reported over the failing COMM system. "All weapons offline. Life support failing." Rodriguez looked at the tactical display showing the Vorthic battleship moving in for the kill. His ship was finished, but he still had one card to play. With steady hands, he initiated the fusion plant's emergency overload sequence. "All hands, abandon ship. This is Captain Rodriguez. It's been an honor serving with you." He was alone on the bridge when the Salem's Lot became a miniature sun, her death taking the Apex Predator and 600 Vorthic souls into the void. Admiral Kexthara felt her flagship lurch as human saboteurs detonated another section of the engineering deck. Her fleet was dying around her, but the humans were paying an equally terrible price. Both sides were locked in a death spiral that could only end in mutual annihilation. Through the chaos, she caught sight of a human heavy cruiser breaking through her defensive line. The ship's hull was scarred and burning. Her weapons were reduced to half strength, but she still flew the banner of Earth's defenders as Kexthara watched. The human vessel turned toward the Sovereign's wrath with obvious intent. "Sir," her tactical officer reported, "the human ship is on a collision course. They're not responding to warnings." Kexthara stared at the approaching vessel and realized she was looking at humanity's true face. Not the diplomatic species that had once sent ambassadors, but the apex predators that had clawed their way to the top of their world's food chain. Through sheer bloody-minded determination, they weren't trying to win this battle. They were trying to make it cost as much as possible. The Reaper's Edge died at 15:23 hours. Her fusion plant finally succumbing to battle damage in a controlled detonation. That Captain Hendricks triggered himself, but before she died, she had one final gift to give her enemies. In the microseconds before the explosion, Hendricks activated the ship's quantum entanglement communicator, a piece of technology that the Vorthik didn't know existed. The signal pierced through the nebula's interference like a blade, reaching receivers scattered throughout human space with a simple message: Phase 3, execute Order Omega. Admiral Kexthara watched the human flagship's death from her crippled bridge, unaware that the explosion marked not an ending, but a beginning. Her fleet had been reduced to fewer than 800 ships, but she had exacted a terrible price. The human ghost fleet was down to less than 200 vessels, most of them damaged and running on emergency power. Signal all ships, she commanded. Through gritted teeth, reform the battle line. We'll finish the remaining humans, and her words were cut off by her sensor operator's strangled cry. Admiral, new contacts bearing 00 Mark 7. Multiple fusion signatures approaching at maximum acceleration. The tactical display lit up with crimson dots as another human fleet emerged from the nebula's outer edge, not the scattered survivors Kexthara expected, but a fresh armada of 500 ships led by vessels she didn't recognize, massive, angular craft that radiated power like miniature stars. Commander Veldan stared at the approaching fleet with visible confusion. That's impossible. Our intelligence confirmed all human military assets were accounted for. The lead human vessel was broadcasting on all frequencies, and the voice that emerged from the comm system carried the weight of absolute authority. This is Admiral Elena Cross, commanding the Earth Defense Force Retribution Fleet. All Vorthik vessels are hereby ordered to surrender immediately or face total annihilation. Admiral Cross stood on the bridge of the UES Nemesis, her flagship a kilometer-long behemoth that had been constructed in the hidden shipyards beyond Neptune's orbit. Around her, the ships of the Retribution Fleet formed a perfect battle array, each vessel a product of humanity's most advanced military technology. Unlike the Ghost Fleet's guerrilla ships, these were built for conventional warfare on a massive scale. Their hulls bristled with weapons that made the Vorthik's plasma cannons look primitive, and their defenses incorporated alien technologies reverse-engineered from captured enemy vessels. "Ma'am," her tactical officer reported, "we're detecting massive battle damage throughout both fleets. The Ghost Fleet appears to have successfully completed their mission." Cross nodded grimly. The Ghost Fleet had been the bait, luring the Vorthik into the nebula where they would be trapped and weakened. Captain Hendricks and his people had known from the beginning that they were unlikely to survive, but they had bought time for humanity's real weapon to arrive. "Signal all ships, we going fast and hard. Show these aliens what happens when you threaten Earth's children." The Retribution Fleet struck like the hammer of an angry god. Their weapons phase disruption cannons that could destabilize matter at the quantum level tore through Vorthik shields as if they were tissue paper. The lead elements smashed into the alien formation with devastating effect. Each human ship wore 3 of their enemies. The UES Retribution rolled through the Vorthik line like an avalanche, her massive guns speaking in measured thunder. Each shot was precisely calculated to maximize damage, targeting reactor housings and weapon arrays with surgical accuracy. The Vorthik destroyer Bloodraiser simply ceased to exist when a phase disruption beam destabilized her hull at the molecular level. But the humans weren't content with superior technology. They brought something else to the battle: the accumulated rage of a species that had watched their homeworld burn. Every human crew member had lost family on Earth, and they channeled that grief into pure mechanical precision. Captain Torres of the UES Avenging Angel found herself facing the Vorthik battleships that had survived the earlier engagement. Her ship was outgunned and outnumbered, but she had advantages the aliens couldn't match. Her crew had trained for this moment for months, drilling until their responses were automatic. "Target the lead battleship's reactor cooling system," she ordered calmly. "Fire on my mark." The phase disruption beam lanced out with perfect accuracy, punching through the alien ship's armor and severing the coolant lines that kept her fusion plant stable. The battleship's death was swift and violent, her reactor going critical in a cascade of explosions that gutted her from within. The second battleship tried to flee, but human destroyers had already moved to block its escape route. The alien vessel found itself surrounded by enemies whose weapons could kill with single shots. Its surrender came too late. The human crews had heard Admiral Cross's broadcast and understood that no quarter would be given. Admiral Kexthara felt her universe collapsing around her as the fresh human fleet carved through her forces with mechanical efficiency. These weren't the desperate survivors she had been fighting, but professional warriors wielding weapons that defied comprehension. "Admiral, Veldan's voice was tight with fear. "We've lost 60% of the fleet. Our weapons are having minimal effect on their hulls." Through the tactical display, Kexthara watched her armada die around her. The humans gave no quarter, accepting no surrenders. Each Vorthic vessel was systematically destroyed, their crews vaporized or left to suffocate in the vacuum of space. For the first time in her military career, she realized she was facing an enemy that fought not for conquest or resources, but for pure revenge. The last Vorthic ship died at 1647 hours, her hull cracking like an eggshell under the focused fire of 3 human destroyers. Admiral Kexthara's flagship, the once mighty Sovereign's Wrath, had been reduced to a drifting hulk with only emergency power and a handful of survivors clinging to life in her shattered compartments. Admiral Elena Cross stood on the bridge of the UES Nemesis, watching the tactical display paint the Nebula in the aftermath of total victory. Of the 2,000 Vorthic ships that had entered the gas clouds hunting human refugees, none would return home. The most powerful battle fleet in alien history had been completely annihilated. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender signals from the remaining Vorthic survivors. Approximately 3,000 individuals across 4 to 7 disabled vessels." Cross stared at the tactical display, feeling the weight of 8 billion dead humans pressing down on her shoulders. The Vorthic had come to this nebula expecting to finish off humanity's remnants. Instead, they had found their own extinction. "Signal all ships," she commanded, her voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "No prisoners, no survivors. They showed Earth no mercy, and they'll receive none in return." The order rippled through the human fleet, and the killing resumed with mechanical precision. Phase disruption beams lanced out to silence the alien surrender signals forever. Within minutes, the nebula held nothing but human ships and the expanding debris clouds of their enemies. Captain Sarakim, one of the few survivors of the Ghost Fleet, floated in the zero-gravity med bay of the UES Retribution. Her body was a map of battle damage burns from plasma fire, lacerations from flying debris, and the hollow exhaustion that came from watching too many friends die. But she was alive, and humanity had won. "How many?" she asked the medical officer treating her wounds of the Ghost Fleet. "Maybe 200 souls out of nearly 100,000. The medic's voice was carefully neutral, but they took 4,700 Vorthic ships with them. The exchange ratio was acceptable. Kim closed her eyes and thought of Captain Hendricks, who had triggered his ship's destruction rather than let the enemy claim her, of Commander Torres, who had rammed her cruiser into a Vorthic battleship while her fusion plant went critical, of thousands of other heroes whose names would be remembered as long as humanity endured. They had known from the beginning that the Ghost Fleet was a suicide mission. Every ship, every crew member had volunteered for a one-way trip into hell. But their sacrifice had meaning they had drawn the Vorthic into the killing ground, where the Retribution fleet could finish them. Admiral Cross moved through the debris field like a conquering angel, her fleet's sensors cataloging the destruction. The nebula that had once been humanity's refuge was now a monument to alien arrogance and human determination. Scattered among the wreckage were pieces of technology that would advance human science. By decades, Vorthic shield generators, fusion, plants, and weapon systems that could be reverse engineered and improved. But the real victory wasn't technological. It was psychological. News of the Battle of Hadron Nebula spread through the galaxy like wildfire, carried by the few alien merchants and observers who had witnessed humanity's impossible triumph. The species that had been written off as extinct had not only survived, but had utterly destroyed the most powerful military force in known space. The Zephyrian Confederacy, which had remained neutral during humanity's extermination, suddenly found their diplomatic channels flooded with requests for formal alliance treaties. The Corvin Collective, which had celebrated Earth's destruction, quietly began withdrawing their fleets from human-adjacent space. And in the deeper reaches of the galaxy, species that had never heard of humanity began asking questions about these mysterious bipeds who had accomplished the impossible. 6 months later, Admiral Cross stood in the newly constructed memorial chamber aboard the UES Remembrance, humanity's first post-war flagship. The walls were lined with holographic displays showing the faces of every human who had died in the Vorthic War. 8 billion civilians from Earth, and nearly 200,000 military personnel who had given their lives in the final campaign. At the center of the chamber stood a simple memorial plaque, its words etched in the same metal that had armored the Ghost Fleet. They came to finish what they started, They found that humanity's ghosts have long memories and longer reach. Let all who would threaten our children remember, we do not forgive, we do not forget, and we never, ever surrender. Captain Sarah Kim, now promoted to Admiral and Commander of the reformed Ghost Fleet, placed a wreath of earth flowers, grown from seeds preserved in the deep space colonies beneath the memorial. Around her, the survivors of humanity's darkest hour stood in silent tribute to the dead. But this was not just a memorial service, it was a promise. Beyond the memorial chamber's viewports, the construction yards of New Geneva Orbital Station buzzed with activity. Humanity was building again, not just to replace what they had lost, but to ensure that no species would ever again mistake them for easy prey. The new ships bore names like Vengeance, Retribution, and Never Again, their hulls inscribed with the coordinates of every human world the Vorthik had destroyed. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson in the swirling depths of the Hadron Nebula. Humanity might be capable of diplomacy, trade, and peaceful coexistence. But when threatened with extinction, they became something far more dangerous. They became ghosts with plasma cannons and the patience to wait in the dark until their enemies made the fatal mistake of thinking they were truly dead. In the years that followed, xenobiologists would study the Battle of Hadron Nebula as a perfect example of what they termed human tactical psychology, the species' unique ability to turn their own deaths into weapons against their enemies. Military academies across the galaxy would teach courses on the Ghost Fleet's tactics, using them as examples of how inferior numbers could triumph through superior planning and absolute commitment. But for the humans who lived through it, the battle was simpler than that. It was the moment when humanity looked into the abyss of extinction and decided that, if they were going to die, they would drag their killers down with them. Admiral Cross took one last look at the memorial wall, her eyes finding the faces of Captain Hendricks and the other heroes who had made victory possible. Then she turned and walked toward the bridge, where reports were coming in of new alien species making contact, all of them very, very polite. The Ghost Fleet had returned from the Nebula bearing more than victory. They had brought with them humanity's reputation as a species that should never, under any circumstances, be pushed to the point where they had nothing left to lose. Because when humanity's back was against the wall and their home lay in ashes, they didn't just fight to survive. They fought to make sure their enemies never got the chance to threaten anyone ever again.